But let's go right back to those counselling foundations and that first counselling session, Rory.
Oh yes, and I think you ask any practitioner who's practiced for a little while which counselling session they're likely to remember, and I think most of them will say it's the first one. I don't know about you, Ken, but I can still remember vividly my first counselling session, and I counselled in the evening that particular day, and the whole day of nerves and worry, and I was completely distracted. It was my first client. And I have to say that looking back, I'm a lot more kinder to myself now. I kind of say to myself, everybody had to start, but I think probably I was a student. I was just starting out, so maybe I wasn't my best, but I did my best, and I think that's the point. I did my best. I sat and I thought, and I spoke, made a couple of phone calls through the day, and talked to some people who are already in practice, some students, my peers. But I think first counselling sessions can be very, very nerve-wracking, and I guess to some extent, Ken, as a general kind of observation, every counselling session, even now, our first counselling sessions. When you meet a new client, it's the first counselling session, isn't it?
Yeah, in the same way, and you're speaking back, Rory, to that very first one, the first time going to practice, that first second of practice where somebody walks through the door, you're in placement, but they're your client and you are their counsellor. In the eyes of the college and in the eyes of your peers, you're on placement, but in the eyes of the person walking through that door, you are their counsellor. And yes, it writes a memory, and quite rightly so. It is a monumental step, really, where you go from the classroom into the real life situation. You enter that stream of practice that is counselling, and from the first second of entering that stream till the time that you maybe one day decide to step away, you are in practice. And yes, I look back and I recognize some of the emotions. I can still key into some of those emotions right now, and that's was a long time ago. And I think, for those of you who may be approaching a first counselling session, or those of you who may have it freshly in your rear view mirror, going to what Rory has said, it is your first step, and it can bring up some emotions that can be interpreted as anxiety or fear. And I remember waiting for my first client, and I had some really good advice, and that was to take at least 10 minutes before the person came to be in the room so that I was centered. And I just closed my eyes and I breathed deeply, and I just came quiet into that moment and just tried to relax and be present within that moment, to really calm myself and put all thoughts and anxieties one side. Not easy, I tell you, but it was a great grounding for when that client walked in. And it's understandable. It's understandable. We spend all this time in studies learning about how important this role is that we play. So it kind of feels like a high stakes game that we step into. But recognizing, as you say, Rory, if we look at those kind of feelings and that way of thinking as only that very, very first client, I think we're missing out, because every client that comes in is the same in that we don't know who they are. We don't know what they're going to present with as they come into that room. And of course, Rory, you've got some ideas of how we might think about and prepare for a client coming in before they get to us, in terms of thinking about who they are.
Yes, and I like what you're alluding to here, Ken, of being fresh. Of it, every client, it's a fresh new relationship. And in terms of the ideas, I think the first thing to do is to make sure that you've got your contracting and what's necessary in the contracting in hand, and also that you've rehearsed it with a peer. And I think that's really, really important. We've talked about this, I think, on the podcast a number of times, that sometimes the contracting side doesn't seem very therapeutic, but actually it is, because what it does, it sets the ground out for the client to be able to speak about what's going on. And I think for a lot of clients, certainly in the age we live now with Facebook and social media and the fact that things get shared, can get shared inappropriately, I think confidentiality is really, really an important aspect of what we do. And, my experience, I've contracted with people huge amounts of times now, is that there's a bit of a sigh of relief, really, because we sometimes assume that the clients know the rules of the game, if you like, that of course they'll know there's confidentiality. Of course they'll know there's exceptions to it. Actually, that's not always the case. In fact, very seldom the case. So by setting out the ground, it's a bit like you're planting crops. You set the ground out, and then once the ground is set and it's solid, flourishing, growth can take place. Oh, yeah. And I think the contracting is really, really important. And I think also just to honor that, because that is the beginning of the relationship where you're saying, this is what I can offer. This protects you. This is where I have to disclose, and I have to disclose something. This is the amount of time we have available together. These are the length of the sessions. And that allows the client then to hear that, take stock of it, and start thinking of what they want to prioritize. I think that contracting sometimes is undersold in terms of its importance in the therapeutic relationship right at the beginning, Ken.
And it is a something that we know and something that we can kind of rely on in that first session. It can give you a little bit of confidence to kind of rest back against the contract, knowing its importance, and it's kind of a more structured format, that contracting session, and that would make up the first session of any counseling session where you would be doing that. So you have got that more formal structure to kind of lean into. And speaking with students, recognizing my own journey, so often we kind of want to get it right. We're going in there, we want to do it right. We want to get it right. And what I might think of or share with you on this is, it's not about what you do. It really isn't. It's about who you are. And so often the thought is that the actual training that's going to go with you into the counseling room is maybe the simulated skills sessions that you may do with your peers within your groups. And of course it is. I mean, it's important that we focus on those skills. They underpin the counseling relationship. But there's another really rich training area that we get through our formal studies, and that is our personal development groups, the group where we're just sitting there listening to others talk, or just being in any group situation where we're listening to others, because that's where we can practice that empathic approach, trying to see what somebody is saying from their perspective, practicing that unconditional positive regard when they say something, that they can say anything. And even if it kind of may conflict with our self-concept or our frame of reference, that we don't have to be jolted into action or reaction. And that's a really good space for practicing for being with clients, because when we're with a client, remember, specifically if you're working in a person-centered way, it's not your session. It's their session. It's not for you to set the pace and lead them. It's for them to recognize that it is their space where they can lead and hold the power within that relationship. And I think that hopefully just takes a little bit of pressure off you as the practitioner going in. It's not about you. It's about them. They will show you the way. If you trust, they will show you the way.
Oh, I think that's beautifully eloquent, Ken. It really is. I mean, I'm sitting here going, yes, that's absolutely true. And I think for students, there's always this kind of dichotomy, isn't there, between, how much theory do I use? How much skills do I use? Because these are drilled in training, theory, skills. And I think my observation would be that actually science or the research, and I'm speaking specifically to the Norcross inventory, John Norcross at Scranton University, who studied this extensively about the success in counselling, is the relationship. The modality is only about 15% of the cake. It's the relationship, the ability to sustain a relationship. And one of the things I wish I'd have known when I started was the work of Petruska Clarkson, who spent a lot of time focusing on what she called intersubjective relationships. And she said the best way to describe a counselling relationship is like the relationship you may have with a cousin. You know them, you're familiar with them, but you're not over familiar with them. And I think that's an excellent maxim to kind of think about, at least at the very start of the relationship. Familiar, as in they're a familiar human being, but obviously not over familiar. So I think that's a useful idea. But if there's anybody listening to this who's starting their practice, you may be listening to this on the way to starting your first counselling session. What I would say is just do your best, just be yourself, because that is the magic formula. The idea that someone's coming to talk to someone they don't know, that they are impartial, they've got no skin in the game, they're not going to give advice or judgment, and just be heard. It's one of the most powerful things one human can do for another. And silence, I think, is a good basic skill to start off with. Just listen. And you'd be surprised just how clients can start to conceptualize and think about what's going on for them and make the changes themselves. But it's the opening, I think the first session is always a bit of a baptism of fire, certainly for students, isn't it, Ken?
Can be. And it can take so many different forms. You may have a client that comes in that wants to really share their journey with you and kind of there's an urgency to get that out, and having to balance that with contracting can feel a little bit tricky and maybe slightly directive, but we've covered that in the episode we did on contracting just a few weeks back. So go and look through our back catalogue. You mentioned, Rory, the freshness of coming in. The freshness of coming in. And that is one of the great benefits of it being a true first session, is you come in with the freshest of freshness. It's that freshly picked. And just in our last episode, in episode 206 of the Counselling Tutor podcast, we spoke about compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is the other end of that, where it's kind of maybe a person or a practitioner feeling worn out from all the messaging and all of the material coming at them, that we become slightly blunted from that. So freshness is something to embrace. It is a true gift. And Rory, you mentioned congruence, being just who you are. By the time you're putting that foot into practice, you are good enough. And if you weren't good enough, your tutors would have pulled you off that course a long time ago. It would have been picked up. You are good enough when you get there. You have that first second with that first client. You've earned your right to be there. You really, really have. And the true you, the real you, is more than good enough for that relationship. You don't have to be a professional counselor, the veneer of that professionalism that can come in. Oh, good morning, Rory. It's lovely to see you today. I am your friendly counselor. Just be you, be your true you. That congruence, so important within that relationship. And of course, it's being our true selves that forms the relationship. We're told, it's the congruence, the unconditional positive regard, and our ability to show an empathic side, and for that to be received, that kind of builds the relationship. It needs to be there. So you are good enough. You really are. And I guess the other flip side to a client that may come in and want to bring their story is that you might get someone who comes in and says, I really don't know where to go here. And they might be quite quiet in the session. And that's okay as well. It's not meant to go a certain way. It's meant to go exactly how it goes. When you get to the end of your first session, that was perfect. It was exactly as it was supposed to be. It just is. You will grow and your practice will grow. And we learn from everything we do. We take it to peer discussion. We may take it to our supervision, and we go and learn and we grow there. But it's just perfect as it is.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, you know, I've been in practice now for nearly 20 years. And I get that same feeling in my tummy when I start with a new client. In those moments before I meet the clients, or before I work online. I work online now, and before, you know, we turn on the telehealth platform. That kind of, it's a strange feeling. I could only say it's a little bit like the feeling you get when you sat watching a play, and the curtains open, and you think, you know, who am I going to meet in this encounter? And I still feel the same. You know, who is this client? Where are we going to go? What's going to happen? What journey will we take? I still have that kind of very magical feeling that still generates. And I used to think that was nerves. I used to think that was nerves. What that is a passion for the work. That's the thing. It's a passion for the work. And, you know, if you're feeling that, if you're feeling those, you know, reframe it. It's a passion for the work. It means that you're alive. If you're turning up and you're thinking, client coming in a few minutes, I'll just, you know, then maybe that light has gone out. If you're feeling that energy, that's the start of your best work, I think.